outstanding work, in particular, Mayor Haroon, we thank you for all your good work. And grateful to see you again. And Mayor Becker, thank you as well. One of these did an outstanding job. We haven't had much of an opponent for a campaign. To my old friend, Mayor Anderson, he was really one of the great leaders in UA Conference tonight. I'm grateful you took the time to be here. And thank you, and this is just personal. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Senator Romero. He picked me up today, so thank you, Senator, for being there on time. I wasn't, but you were. Thank you. And to Doug and Michelle, to future Governor Jim, congratulations on all your hard work, everything you've been doing. To Michael, 10 extraordinary years. You should be very proud. And congratulations in particular to you. And Brandy and Chris, thank you for all your hard work and for your passion and stewardship and your constancy and faith and devotion to the cause that brings us all here tonight. I think you would agree with me. You can't pick up a paper, you can't watch TV, listen to the news without reconciling the fundamental fact that all around the world, literally nations and people are being torn apart because of racial, religious, and ethnic controversies that by definition have fueled fanaticism and fueled terror. But here we are in America, the world's most diverse democracy. And at our best, I believe that the world looks to us to see that it's possible to live together, to prosper together, and advance together across every conceivable and imaginable difference. America has always been a country of dreamers and doers, of entrepreneurs, of innovators, a country that has prided itself on being on the leading and cutting edge of new ideas and change in social justice. It hasn't been easy, but eventually we get it right. And the cause that brings us together is that cause that we continue to advance. Civil rights didn't end with the Civil Rights Act, didn't end with the Voting Rights Act, it didn't end with Brown versus Board of Education, nor did it end when Richard Loving stepped up after being sentenced to 1 year in prison for having the audacity to say "I do" to a young lady named Mildred Jeter, and eventually made his way to the U.S. Supreme Court and tore down the walls as it relates to marriage equality in 1967. It continues to this day. Dr. King said it so eloquently, that long arc of history always bends towards justice, but what he left out is that we have got to be the ones that are doing the heavy lifting. And that's the challenge for all of us here and for all of us across this country, for matter around the rest of the world, is we have work to be done. Good enough never is. There is no having made it as it relates to equality and the struggle of social justice. Success in this respect, in this arena, is not a place or a definition, it's a direction. And so we're here to celebrate 10 extraordinary years of Equality Utah. We're here to celebrate our proud past, to reconcile all our struggles, but we're also here to celebrate a fundamental truth that, as Dr. King said as well, we're all bound together by a web of mutuality, that we're all in this together. I mean, that comes from Scripture. The Bible teaches us we're many parts, but one body. And when one part suffers, we all suffer. There is no leak on your side of the boat. We are all in this together. And what we celebrate here tonight, as we celebrate your common wisdom and your collective efforts, is we really celebrate that fundamental principle. That we're sure are celebrating all our interesting differences, but at the end of the day, we're celebrating those things that bind us together, our common humanity, the things that truly make us great. And I'm just proud to be here with you as we celebrate that fundamental human need to reconcile those differences and again unite around that common humanity. Think back 20 years. Think back to 1993. Wasn't that long ago when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was advanced. 1995 here in Utah, Governor Levin signed the nation's first law that would deny recognition of any same-sex couples being married in this state, the first state to advance a version of what a year later became known as simply DOMA. Think of how far we've come. Think about the courage of people like Governor Howard Dean in 2000 that stepped up at a time on an extraordinarily high bar, and that was called civil unions. President Clinton even went as far as to say to Governor Dean, and this was related in Governor Dean's book, that, Governor, you have given up the prospects of ever being President of the United States because you supported civil unions. But he had the courage to step up and step in. A year later, in 2001, 7 couples came together in Massachusetts, and they filed a lawsuit against the Department of Public Health. That lawsuit ultimately went to the Massachusetts Supreme Court in 2003 with the Goodrich decision, and really marked an extraordinary moment in marriage equality, not just in that state, but in this country. But of course, earlier in the year, it was preceded by the landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision, and that was Lawrence v. Texas, which finally reconciled those anti-sodomy laws that govern that state. It's been an amazing decade, this last 10 years, when you came together. Not just in Massachusetts, not just in courts large and small, but even in cities, large and small. San Francisco, we had the great privilege of stepping up into this debate, and I got frustrated back there in Washington, D.C., and I had the privilege of Nancy Pelosi's invitation to go see the president give his State of the Union speech. There were apparently a lot of extra tickets, and I thought I'd sneak in. Just wanted to check out the room. And in that speech, it was clear that the president, really a re-election speech, was going to support a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage. For the first time in literally over 200 years since the Bill of Rights, only 16 times the Constitution has been amended. Each and every time it's been amended to expand people's rights, never to deny people's rights. But he was the President of the United States in my lifetime, 2004, that was making a commitment to the American people to do just that and support a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage. I wasn't just 2 weeks into having taken my oath of office to support and defend that same Constitution. And I felt this great weight of responsibility after I left that room and actually got back to San Francisco a little bit early and called one of Utah's own, Kate Kennedy, and asked Kate to come in and ask for some advice. And that advice ultimately led to a decision to take a life worth living and to celebrate it as they've celebrated 50 years of constancy, love, faith, and devotion. And that was the life between 2 extraordinary women, Phyllis Lyon and Adele Martin. And we asked them, they've been together over 50 years at that point, if they would be willing to come down to City Hall in rainy February and say, I do. None of us knew what to expect from them. But over 4,036 other couples made their way in that winter, or what we call February love, in the great city of San Francisco. Many of you are here tonight. Thank you for coming up and sharing your life and your life and your passion. And what was, for me, so extraordinary about that, it was nothing more than wanting to put a human face on the issue. Because at the end of the day, that's fundamentally it. just real people trying to live, as it was said, their lives out loud, to be fully expressive, to be able to do the things folks like me are able to take for granted each and every day. And I think we had a little bit of impact. Those couples, as the report came out, just seemed so normal, people said. Parents, grandparents, sons, daughters, aunts, and uncles. And we realized it wasn't about Phyllis and Dell as much as it was about all of them. It was about the young man who came up with his mother and said, my mother got married out there in February, and it was his eyes, and it was his life that was as impacted as his mother's. And I hope we began to change the conversation. I know we woke up a sleeping giant here. Because I expected, there were some folks here that funded a $10 million campaign where I was in everybody's TV screen for almost a year with Proposition 8. And we struggled because it immediately became politicized, and we had a frame that ultimately led to the defeat. But then ultimately, from that defeat, was the courage of other people that stepped up and stepped into this debate and moved forward with extraordinary alacrity and extraordinary leadership, demonstrated, of course, just recently by the outstanding governor of the great state of New York, who stepped up in a big way and stepped up in a big way for the community. I say all this not to impress or just to go back in memory lane, but to be reminded again that long arc of history bends towards justice. So much so that the bookmark from 1993 to just this last year, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, finally overturned. The shame that is DOMA about to be overturned. A president that has stepped up in a big way on hate crimes and anti-bullying legislation and is stepping into this debate. And I'm confident that in his next term will step up in the marriage equality debate and have finally write that down. That's remarkable progress. Year of my birth, blacks could marry whites, until Richard Loving stepped into the debate. That one, despite the gray hair, is that long ago. And think how quickly we have moved in the last few decades. So let me close by doing what Doug apparently wasn't supposed to do. And that's just, once again, thanking all of you. Because at the end of the day, this movement of equality is not about somebody on a white horse. It's not about someone in formal authority. It's about people like yourselves, people like Bruce and others that have used their moral authority to step up and to step in and right these wrongs. I'll close with this final consideration. And it's a truism. Guys like me come and go. The elected officials in this room, as profoundly important as they are, they're given a moment in time. And we can invest an enormous amount out here in Utah on getting, quote unquote, friendly leaders in elected office. But you know, as I know, with redistricting coming up, with the majorities in the state, that may be a frustrating endeavor for some time, but you can never give up. But don't consume yourself with that frame. Because at the end of the day, all great movements have not come from people in elected office. They come from people outside of that formal authority. Think about Dr. Martin Luther King. Think about Gandhi. Think about Mandela. Think about Barack Obama. Think about the peak of their influence. The peak of their influence. They shared two things in common. One is none of them were in elected office, and the other thing was jail time. It's worth considering. Moral versus formal authority. So I just hope, as you go home tonight, don't get too consumed with who's up and who's down, Democrats, Republicans, people that are on our screen for a lawsuit or not, redistricting, and all that stuff. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you have done. You're 1,600 strong and tens of thousands of more like you all across this county, hundreds of thousands across this state, millions and millions of people all across our country, and hundreds of millions of people around the world are counting on you not to run the 90-yard dash. To remember that any fundamental effort is not won by interested people. It's won by committed people. Committed people find ways of getting things done. Interested people find excuses. You are the committed ones. Keep doing what you have done. Keep being that shining example. Keep being that inspiration. And keep the faith, because one thing I know in closing, the best is yet to come. Thank you all very much.